Steven had barely transferred to our school when he dated every pretty girl around. The arrogant school beauty, the aloof class belle, the sweet girl next door. When there was no challenge left, he started pursuing me. I have talked with him about all his past girlfriends, and they are completely different from one another. Nerds, goody two-shoes top students, fools, weirdos. This is the evaluation he gave me. Later, he cornered me against the wall and said, "Beatrice, I really love you." I lifted my eyes with indifference and asked, "So what?" Chapter 1. From the moment Steven transferred in, he was instantly popular, handsome, with an impressive family background. Even the principal of our prestigious high school would greet him with a warm smile and politely ask, "Steven, how's your father's health these days?" Everyone fawned over him, everyone except me. When Steven first started chasing me, people came to warn me, "Oh my God, Beatrice, that's Steven. Don't play hard to get too much, or you might lose him." I didn't understand. In everyone's eyes, Steven was untouchable. Everything he wanted came effortlessly. Everyone longed for his favor, as though he were some ancient emperor. His slightest glance, his nod of attention, was treated like a rare imperial blessing. So I was expected to blush shyly, act flattered by his attention, and finally throw myself into his arms, becoming his girlfriend, only to end up as just another one of his many ex-girlfriends. Yes, ex-girlfriends. Steven was a notorious womanizer on campus. His reputation as a shameless playboy was clear. Within his first 2 months at school, he had dated almost every pretty girl around. The proud school beauty, the aloof class belle, the adorable girl next door. His fickleness and his charm went hand in hand. When there was no challenge left and things grew dull, someone joked with him, "If you can conquer Beatrice, now that would be impressive." He gave a lazy glance, sneering, "How hard could that be?" And then he started pursuing me. How do I know all this? Because at that moment, I was sitting right in front of them, working on practice problems. At school, I was a legend, the legend of academics. From the very first year, no matter how hard the exams were, my total score had never fallen below 680. I was always ranked first, far ahead of second place, in every test, big or small. Beyond studying, I had little interest in anything else. That's why they joked with Steven about chasing me. I couldn't understand their logic, it was just boring. But Steven actually took it as a challenge and began chasing me. At first, it was imported snacks slipped into my desk. Then came small, understated bouquets of flowers, daisies still beaded with water, peonies barely budding, delicate little water lilies. They sat quietly on the windowsill beside my desk, seen by others as something deeply romantic. Sometimes it was a lavish breakfast, other times low-key but clearly expensive gifts. This was probably his usual routine for pursuing girls. I ignored it all. For a month, he courted me in this casual, nonchalant way, and I never said a single word to him. Our first real conversation happened one afternoon. He held a book, pointed at an extra question, and asked me how to solve it. I was always willing to help anyone with academics. While I explained the problem-solving method to him on scrap paper, he sat beside me and suddenly asked, "What do you like?" My eyes lifted from the draft paper to his face. He rested his chin on one hand, sharp brows and bright eyes, the loose strands of hair across his forehead making his features look even deeper, more striking, more handsome than any idol the girls in our class swooned over. But I set down my pen and looked at him coldly. "Seriously, if you're not going to focus on studying, don't waste my time." He suddenly burst out laughing. His gaze skimmed over the scrap paper and finally landed back on me. "The answer is route 3. I get it. So, what do you like?" I ignored him. Later, I started experiencing strange bullying, black graffiti scrawled across my desk, my chair and books disappearing, being locked in the bathroom, cheap, childish forms of school violence. When Steven found me, he appeared like some god descending, the savior of a bullied schoolgirl. He forced open the locked bathroom door, looked at my drenched figure, shrugged off his jacket to hand to me, and frowned. "Who did this?" As if he were ready to stand up for me, righteously indignant. I glanced up at him with indifference, didn't take his jacket, only checked the time and said flatly, "You've made me lose 15 minutes of physics class. He raised a brow and asked, "What's that got to do with me?" Looking at him then, I finally lost patience. I fixed my gaze on him and laid it out, one by one. First, I'm kind and low-key. I've never offended anyone. Second, before you announced you wanted to chase me, no one ever bullied me. Third, unless it was under your orders, who would dare bully the girl that young Master Stephen wanted to pursue? The fake concern on his face disappeared, replaced by a half-smile, a lazy amusement. He pulled back his jacket, stared at me with interest, and said with a chuckle, "Well, you caught me. So boring." I turned my head away coldly, brushing past him in silence, but as I was about to pass, he grabbed my wrist, forcing me to stop. He tilted his head, studying me, and asked, "Beatrice, are you playing hard to get?" That actually made me laugh. I stopped walking, turned back to look at him, and sneered, "Then hold your patience and stop bothering me. When my foxtail finally shows, you'll know whether I was playing hard to get or not." He tightened his grip on my wrist, eyes focused intently on my face. After a moment, he suddenly laughed. He said, "Interesting." Chapter 2. I did not love Stephen, but it seemed no one believed me. How could anyone not love Stephen? He was so outstanding, handsome, smart, and charming. My indifference seemed to trouble him deeply. I often caught him watching me with that thoughtful, searching gaze, like a hunter waiting by a tree stump. He began laying his patient traps. He became my desk mate. At first, everyone in class treated it like a show. Some even set up bets. I remained unmoved, studying, solving problems, memorizing books. He sat beside me like he was just thin air. Later, everyone simply assumed we were a couple. Our math teacher loved to call us both up to the blackboard to solve problems. Every time our names were called, the class erupted in knowing laughter. And in the midst of their teasing, he would turn his head, watching me intently with a faint smile, as if he were deeply in love. Of course, whenever we solved problems together, he never once beat me. My former deskmate once said I was as unromantic as a stone. She said, "Come on, Beatrice. That's Stephen. I know he's a playboy, but who wouldn't want to date him? We don't need it to end in happily ever after. Just the joy of once having had it is enough." I laid her barely passing physics paper in front of her and said, expressionless, "Let your physics scores bloom into something first. You still managed to get wrong the question I explained to you before." She groaned and snapped in frustration, "Beatrice, you block of wood. You fool." Poor young Master Stephen. I didn't see what was so pitiful about Stephen. To him, I was nothing more than a whim, a passing fancy. There was no sincerity, only conquest. The first time things softened slightly between us was when my mother slipped, broke a bone, and was hospitalized. I took a week off. Stephen found me at the marketplace, selling fish. The neighbors all knew about my family's situation, so my fish sold out quickly once I set up. One aunt carrying a black carp sighed and said, "Beatrice, when I finish making soup, come by and bring some to your mother in the hospital. The college entrance exams are coming. You still need to focus on your studies." I smiled. "Thank you, Auntie. Don't worry. I won't fall behind in school." Then I started cleaning up the mess, water tanks, cutting boards, fish scales everywhere. When I stacked up the boxes one by one and finally looked up, I saw Stephen. He stood at the entrance of the noisy, fish-scented market, his whole presence clashing with the smell of seafood and raw meat. I didn't know how long he had been standing there, but his gaze was calm and fixed on me. I ignored him as I struggled to lift a box into the back of my tricycle. He stepped through the mud in his expensive shoes, took the fishy box from my hands, and placed it steadily in the cart. He said, "Things like this should be done by someone stronger." I didn't put on airs. I quietly let him help me move everything, one box after another, without minding the dirt. Then he sat down in the driver's seat of my electric tricycle, somehow making it look like a luxury Porsche. Tilting his head toward me, he said, "Come on, where's your house? I'll take you." I paused, standing there, and asked evenly, "Do you even know how to ride this?" He froze, that handsome face slowly clouding over with bafflement, probably the first time he had been stumped. Looking so helpless, I couldn't help but chuckle softly. Get off, I said. He glanced at me, then for some reason also started laughing. His tone held a sigh. Beatrice, this is the first time I've ever seen you smile. For the rest of that week, he came every day, on time. He helped me set up the stall, helped me pack up. The first time he saw me kill a fish with swift strokes of the knife, he stood there laughing inexplicably. I gave him a puzzled look. He smiled with a tilt of his lips and said, just thought of a meme. Don't know if you've heard it before. I've killed fish at RT Mart for 10 years. My heart is already as cold as the knife in my hand. I thought it was just a joke, but here it is in real life. Then he asked me, half serious, half jesting, what about you, Beatrice? Is your heart as cold as the knife in your hand? I smiled at him, answering his probing directly. Stephen, you and I live in two different worlds. You've seen it. I'm not playing hard to get. I don't have time. I don't want to, and I can't afford to play your games. Don't waste your efforts on me. My eyes were sincere. He stared at me intently. The smile at the corners of his lips slowly faded, then returned again. He turned his head, hiding his expression, and all I heard was, I understand. Finally, I felt relieved. Chapter 3. Stephen started dating again. Beautiful, strong-willed, proud girls. He changed girlfriends just as quickly as before. He was still my desk mate, but finally stopped bothering me, and gradually no one linked us together anymore. I sometimes doubted whether Stephen even understood what liking someone really meant. His feelings were like clouds in the sky, shifting far too quickly. I would sometimes witness it myself. Yesterday he might skip class to buy milk tea just to coax a girl, but the very next day he could coldly say, let's break up. Occasionally, I would see a tearful girl begging him to stay. His tone would be gentle, his smile warm, but beneath it all was a detachment, a faint impatience. He would say, you knew what kind of person I was before we got together, didn't you? Let's part on good terms. Don't cling. I kept working on my practice problems and, watching his ruthless, unmoved demeanor, I said sincerely, Stephen, you really are a jerk. He leaned back in his chair, spreading his hands. I'm openly a jerk, shamelessly a womanizer. That's a lot better than those liars who cheat people out of money or sex. Then he smiled at me. Besides, as long as you don't date me, I'm a good guy. That, at least, was true. I lowered my head and went back to my problems, ignoring him again. The first time we drank together was after the college entrance exams. At our class farewell banquet, everyone's feelings were mixed, bittersweet, reluctant, influenced by the atmosphere. I even sipped a little beer. Later, he walked me home. Under the moonlight, he silently followed behind me. That night, unusually, he was quiet. When I turned back, I saw him lowering his head, stepping deliberately on my shadow with every step. I couldn't help laughing, half amused, half exasperated. What are you doing? I asked. He lifted his head, looked at me matter-of-factly, and asked, Deskmate, which university do you want to go to? I turned my head away. He continued, you know, even if you don't tell me, I could find out. I just wanted to hear it from you. I sighed. A university. He nodded, standing there smiling at me. In that moment, I suddenly understood why. Even though he was an unapologetic womanizer, there were still so many girls willing to have him, even for a little while. Whatever else could be said, his looks were truly dazzling, especially now, standing under the moonlight with that smile, tall and graceful, like a jade tree in the wind. His smile as radiant as the moon itself. His smile was genuine, unlike the lazy, careless grin I usually saw on his face. Perhaps it was the moonlight being too gentle, but even his expression and tone seemed softer than ever. Looking at me tenderly, he said in a low voice, then, deskmate, see you at a university. I said nothing, only looked at him quietly. At last, I replied with one simple word, goodbye. I thought that would be the end. His call came before the results were even posted. I wasn't surprised he had found out my admission results early. He must have been furious, so angry he laughed. Over the phone, his voice was cold as he repeated 3 times, Beatrice, well done. I held the phone in silence until the line cut off with a busy tone. When the results were announced, the school celebrated my admission to C University as the top scorer with a bright red banner. Beneath it, I saw Steven's name. He had gone to a university. A university and C University were in the same college town, separated only by 2 streets. But knowing Steven's pride, I doubted he would ever contact me again. We had always belonged to 2 different worlds, even in the same college town. Unless fate pushed us together, I believed we would never meet again. And indeed, that was the truth. I entered my new school and quickly became a new legend there. From my dorm balcony, I could even see the camphor trees of a university. But until my junior year, I never once ran into Steven. I only occasionally heard his name, woven into different scandals and campus legends. And I imagined he must have heard mine as well. Our next meeting was in the 2nd semester of junior year. That year, by coincidence, I went to C City for volunteer teaching, but I hadn't expected an earthquake to strike suddenly. It happened at midnight, just after I'd finished preparing lessons and was reading a research report, when the dormitory building collapsed. I reacted quickly and hid in a triangular corner where the structure created a small space of support. My body was spared from the crushing steel and bricks. By the time they dug me out, 2 or 3 days had already passed. I was weak then, but still calm. The rescue team held up their fingers before me, asking how many. Someone handed me water. Others cheered. And then, behind them, I saw Steven, silent, his eyes red, staring at me with unwavering focus. His hands gripped tools, his clothes torn to rags, his face smeared with dust and blood, a Steven with no trace of his usual charm. I didn't know how he had learned I was in C City teaching, but the truth was clear enough, laid bare in front of me the moment I was rescued. He knew I was in C City, so he came. No matter what our ending would be, whenever I recalled that moment, I would think, at least once, he had truly loved me. We hadn't seen each other for 3 years. That night, as I received 4 fluids, he sat by my bed. His features were more mature than 3 years before, quieter, more reserved. The line of his jaw was firm, sharp. His eyes followed the saline drip, drop by drop. He looked self-mocking, his tone tinged with confusion, as he said, "Beatrice, when you saw me, your expression seemed so surprised." He smiled faintly. Honestly, I was surprised myself. When I heard about the earthquake in C City, I didn't think, I just came. These 3 years, I've kept up with your news, your updates. It's strange, even I can't figure it out. What exactly do I feel about you? Is it obsession, born from never having had you? Or is it that I really, truly like you? I have nothing to compare it to. But in my world, you've always been the exception. I interrupted him. Since you don't know the answer, then let's verify it. I looked at him calmly. My words seemed to stun him. For a moment, he didn't know if he had heard me right. I smiled at him and said, "Let's verify it. Steven, want to date me?" His dumbfounded expression made him look like an absolute fool. But a moment later, he turned his head and muttered, "Are you pitying me?" He gave a forced, careless laugh. "I've dated so many girls. Don't think that I cut him off quietly. I'm not heartless. Steven, I haven't killed enough fish for my heart to be that cold. No one could stay unmoved in circumstances like this." I paused, then added with a smile, "But if you keep talking, I might really change my mind." He fell silent, swallowed back the rest of his words, then growled with a kind of fierce determination. "Then you'd better think carefully. If we're verifying this, it means I'm the only right answer for you. Once you hand in the paper, there's no taking it back." I smiled at him and said coolly, "But Steven, before we start, we need to lay down 3 ground rules." Chapter 4. Steven and I once had a period of sweetness, like a fairy tale, where the beginning is full of twists, but the ending always sweet. Except, Steven and I did not live inside a fairy tale. After the sweetness came the inevitable mess. I don't even remember when the arguments started. At first, they were about small things, like him accepting handmade gifts from other girls, playing video games with underclassmen, escorting tipsy female friends home. He never understood why those things made me angry. I didn't cheat. I don't love them. Beatrice, what exactly are you mad about? I could only look at him in silence. He had everything: handsome, wealthy, talented, with a powerful family background. Naturally, people flocked to him like fish swimming downstream. He drifted among them, surrounded by ambiguous affections, yet claiming he never really let anything touch him. When we were together, he tried to rein himself in, to live clean, but clearly, what I defined as loyalty and what he thought of as loyalty were not the same thing. Maybe he had no ulterior intentions. Still, I often received messages from unknown senders, taunting me, asking when I would step down. The arguments built up. Eventually, I grew tired of speaking at all. I broke up with Steven on his birthday. I had baked him a cake myself and gone to his school. Standing at the gate, I called him. He hesitated, then asked, "Didn't you say you were working on biology research and had no time?" Holding the cake, I smiled. "And didn't you say I never gave you surprises?" After hanging up, he came rushing from off campus, probably celebrating with friends. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, smiling as he hurried over. But as he bent down to take the cake from my hands, I saw a lipstick mark on the collar of his white shirt, and a faint bite mark on his neck. Calmly, I turned my phone to selfie mode, captured the mark, and held it up before his eyes. "What's this?" I asked. For once, he looked panicked. He kept apologizing, explaining it was from a game of truth or dare, that it meant nothing. The bite mark was from a girl he had pushed away. She lunged at him and he wasn't on guard. He truly hadn't betrayed me. I was always steady, always calm. That day, maybe for the first time, I lost control. I smashed the cake against him, looking at him coldly. I sighed in exhaustion. Verification complete. Steven, from the first step, our calculation was already wrong. From the very beginning, the answer we wrote down doomed every step afterward to be wrong. In his stunned silence, I sighed again. "We're not suited. Let's break up." And I turned away. After that, Steven kept humbling himself with apologies. For someone always so proud, it was probably the first time in his life he bowed his head to anyone. He said, "Beatrice, that really meant nothing. You know that to me. You've always been the exception." I sighed. Later, when he came by, I happened to be eating with a senior from my department. That senior had once pursued me, but after I politely rejected him, we returned to being just friends. Steven knew about it. The moment he saw us together, his expression turned dark, stormy. See? That was his double standard. I looked at him calmly and said, "Steven, by your logic, I only had a meal with someone who once pursued me. Doesn't that mean nothing?" He snapped, "Beatrice, you're only relying on the fact that I like you." I sighed. Steven, liking someone shouldn't be like this. My heart had always stayed level. Maybe it was because I knew Steven too well. Breaking up was never beyond my expectations. Once, drunk, he called me and asked, "Beatrice, sometimes I really wonder, did you ever love me at all? How can you stay so calm?" Steven refused to accept the breakup until I was preparing to go abroad for further study. Before I left, he even chased me to the airport. Standing at the departure gate, his tone was cold, edged with restrained anger. "Beatrice, you really want to break up? Is that it?" I said I would change. "I'll keep away from all women. I'll live by your definition of loyalty. And still, you won't turn back?" I exhaled softly. "Yes." He stared at me for a long time. Finally, his voice was low, cold, heavy with fury. "Fine. Don't regret it." I gave him no reply, only turned and boarded the plane without hesitation. That was probably the first time Steven had ever lost in love. He had never lacked admirers, always free and confident in a sea of flowers. It was likely the first time a woman had ended things with him, a wound to his pride. So, even though we had many mutual friends, whenever I was present in a conversation, he would remain silent. Not his usual demeanor. Later, when a terrorist attack struck the neighborhood where I lived abroad, I don't know how Steven knew where I stayed. That night, in the chaos, he called. "Are you safe?" he asked. "I'm fine." Then, realizing how cold I sounded, I added, "No need to worry. The embassy has already issued aid notices." He grunted in acknowledgement and hung up. The next day, He appeared before me, travel-worn. He didn't speak. He only looked at me from afar, as though confirming I was truly safe, then turned and left. At first, my friends tried persuading me. Beatrice, I really don't get you. Young Master Stephen is rich, handsome, devoted. Why won't you have him? In their eyes, Stephen's indifference toward others was all an act. To me, he was genuine, the one exception. After I went abroad, I still heard whispers. Beatrice, it's strange. Stephen seems like a womanizer. But with you, we're certain, no matter what, if you just turned around, he'd always be right there within reach. Others said, Beatrice. Stephen even said he would change. Why not give him another chance? I only smiled silently. Perhaps only I understood, no matter how many times, the ending between Stephen and me would be the same. When it came to love, I was always clear-cut, never gray. I demanded fidelity, my lover's heart and eyes filled with me alone. Like that lyric, do you really understand the meaning of only? It's not as simple as breathing. Stephen, at his core, was restless, untamed, a lover of freedom. Temptations surrounded him endlessly. He could change for me for a time, but not forever. One day, when the freshness faded, when he no longer wished to compromise for love, he would return to his old ways. Wouldn't that just repeat the same cycle? People called me cold, unfeeling, but the truth was I was simply clear-eyed. And besides, I had one habit: I never did the same problem twice, especially not one I had already proven wrong. Chapter 5. I returned to my country 3 years later. Before I came back, while chatting with an old friend, she sighed and told me Stephen had a girlfriend. She added that the girl resembled me somewhat, but then quickly corrected herself. Of course, she's still not as beautiful or as elegant as you. I sat staring blankly at a vase of roses on the nearby table. After a long pause, I came back to myself, smiled faintly, and said, after all these years, he still hasn't changed. My friend laughed awkwardly and added, that girl looks so much like you, but we all know Stephen isn't serious about her. I could hear the disdain in her tone as she went on. She's unbearable. It's not her fault she looks like you, but she found out your preferences somehow, and she's always deliberately imitating you. Your hairstyle, your clothing, your way of speaking, even your taste in food, and she even mimics the curve of your smile. We're all disgusted by it. I stayed silent for a moment, then changed the subject. We chatted a bit more before hanging up. I didn't think much of it, until I returned, and my friends organized a welcome banquet for me. That was when I met Stephen and the so-called substitute. I didn't know whether Stephen had brought her intentionally to meet me. Standing before me, holding her hand, he introduced, Beatrice. This is Violet, my girlfriend. He put extra weight on the word girlfriend, watching my reaction closely as he spoke, curious about how much Violet actually resembled me. I studied her carefully. On closer look, her features weren't really alike, but her brows and expressions carried about 50 or 60% resemblance. Paired with our similar hairstyles and clothing style, that resemblance stretched to 70 or 80%. I withdrew my gaze and smiled faintly at them both. Hello. Violet stared at me in a daze, then finally returned the smile, pale and weak. Hello. I've long heard your name. Inside, I sighed. To Stephen's girlfriends, I must have always been the unattainable white moonlight, the one who didn't need to do anything. Just standing there was enough to win. Love, magnified by imagination and suspicion, had turned me into the phantom rival of every girlfriend who came after me. I didn't respond to her words, only turned away to greet another friend. Perhaps my lingering gaze on Violet gave Stephen the illusion that I cared. As if to prove something, or deliberately put on a show, Stephen treated her with extreme tenderness, pulling out her chair, pouring her drink. When Violet's pale face drew his attention, he reached out to feel her forehead, asking with concern, "Are you cold?" He slipped off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. Our friends stayed silent, but I felt all their eyes shift from him onto me. I smiled gently at Violet and said, "If you're still cold, should I ask the waiter to raise the temperature a bit?" She shook her head silently. Later, a dish of spicy crayfish, my favorite, was served. Our friends laughed. Who asked the kitchen to cook blue lobster in spicy style? What a waste. As they said it, all eyes turned meaningfully towards Steven. He didn't look up, just began peeling the crayfish. Back when we were together, he always peeled them for me. Everyone used to say it was Steven's way of lowering himself. This time, when he finished, he placed the meat into Violet's bowl, his tone gentle. Eat. Violet lifted her eyes toward me, then turned back to Steven, and ate silently. Steven kept peeling. She ate whatever he placed in her bowl. I didn't touch a single piece. By the time he placed the last one into her bowl, the warmth on his face had turned cold. He said flatly, "Do you want more? Since you like shrimp so much, I'll have them bring another plate." Violet's voice suddenly broke. Softly, she said, "I never eat spicy food, and I don't eat shrimp." The table fell silent, the air thick with awkwardness. I stood up, my face cold. "I'm going out for a bit." Chapter 6. When I came out of the restroom, Steven was waiting outside. He leaned casually against the marble wall, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans, yet somehow carrying an air of arrogance and nobility. Just like in my memory, hearing the sound, he turned his head toward me. His eyes were cold, the corners of his mouth drawn down. "Beatrice, are you proud of yourself?" he asked. I gave him a puzzled look. His tone was calm, as though he were struggling to suppress his emotions. "Seeing me with someone who looks so much like you, seeing that even after 5 years I still can't forget you, are you proud of that?" Suddenly, it all felt meaningless. He probably wouldn't believe me, but had I known tonight would turn out this way, I never would have come. He said it himself, 5 years. I thought by now we had both moved on. To me, he was nothing more than an ordinary friend. I sighed. "You always trample on other people's sincerity." "I'm not proud. Steven, if you don't like Violet, don't waste her time, and don't waste yours either. If you do like her, then treat her well." "Treat her well?" He suddenly laughed, self-mocking. "When you weren't here, I lied to myself, searching for your shadow in Violet. But today, sitting across from you, I realized she's nothing like you." "No, that's wrong. On the surface, she does resemble you a little, but why is it that next to you, she suddenly seems like some cheap, second-hand knockoff? How could I insult you by treating her as your substitute?" Steven, my gaze shifted from Violet, who had just stepped out behind him, to his face. We had been outside for some time, long enough for Violet to come searching. His words had reached her ears. She staggered back 2 steps, one hand bracing against the wall. Her eyes turned red instantly as she stared blankly at Steven's back. I had always remained calm, detached, but in that moment, even I couldn't help letting some anger show. "After all this time, you still haven't learned how to respect others. No one is anyone's substitute. Violet isn't some second-hand, worthless thing, but you're still the same garbage as ever." Without another glance at him, I brushed past him and Violet, walked back into the room, said goodbye to my friends, grabbed my bag, and left. The next day, Steven called me. Despite how I had humiliated him last night, he wasn't angry. On the contrary, he even apologized, humbly, for using Violet to test me, for embarrassing me. He laughed over the line. "Beatrice, let me buy you dinner, as an apology?" He still didn't understand. I hadn't felt embarrassed. I had only felt angry, and my anger wasn't because he showered Violet with tenderness in front of me. I was angry because after all this time, he still hadn't learned how to respect people. He never truly understood what liking or loving meant, yet insisted on trampling it again and again. I told him I was busy, then hung up the phone without expression. I met Violet a week later. My assistant told me there was a young woman outside looking for me. Then she added curiously, "Beatrice, she looks a lot like you. Do you have a younger sister? Why have I never heard you mention one?" I set down the microscope slide, thought for a moment, then decided to go meet her. Truthfully, I had no real impression of Violet. I had no interest in interacting with her. I could already guess why she had come. It was, inevitably, about Steven. I was busy. After returning home, I had been hired by the Academy of Biological Sciences in City A. I had devoted my life to biological research. All I wanted was to work quietly. I had no intention of being dragged into relationship dramas I couldn't care less about. I went out to meet Violet because I remembered the pale look on her face in the hallway that night, her reddened eyes, and the way her gaze shattered when she looked at Steven's back. I told myself it was an act of kindness, a way to accumulate virtue. When Violet saw me, she stood up abruptly from the bench. Her expression was uneasy, her eyes brimming with tears. But thankfully, she didn't fling herself into my arms sobbing. She only stood there and said softly, "Miss Beatrice, I'm sorry to bother you. I didn't want to come." The tears that had hovered in her eyes finally fell. Silent, she looked like a lost lamb, helpless, grieving. I just. Steven suddenly wants to break up with me. I know he's always loved you. I came just to ask, have you two reconciled? I shook my head. No. Relieved. She let out a breath, then smiled through her tears, hurriedly saying, "I'm sorry." Then she stared at me intently, her gaze full of envy. "I really envy you. Steven loves you so much. I'd give up everything I have just to trade for his love. Everyone longs for him, but it seems only you can look down on him." I let out a laugh, meeting her bewildered eyes. I asked in return, "Do you really think Steven loves me?" Looking down at the marble floor tiles behind her, I smiled. "Maybe he does love me, but not the way you imagine." I paused, then asked, "Is that all you came here to ask me?" She froze, then said, "No." She went on to tell me Steven's love for me was real. How the first time she met him, he was drunk and calling my name. How he often stared at her face, dazed, as if lost in thought. How the tattoo on his wrist, the way he'd hold his phone and gaze at an overseas number but never dial, all of it. Proof of his infatuation and devotion. Finally, with tears in her eyes, she said, "Miss Beatrice, I don't know what misunderstanding lies between you and him, but Steven truly loves you. I've never seen him love anyone like this. Even though he's with me, I know he only sees you through me. No matter what happened, could you give him another chance?" I looked at her quietly, then asked coldly, "Does saying all this make you feel noble?" Her tear-streaked face froze. She hadn't expected my indifference, but I truly meant the question. "Do you and Steven even know what it means to love someone?" I asked. "You all say Steven loves me. How? By failing to restrain himself when he was with me? By finding a substitute after our breakup, and calling that devotion? And you, liking Steven so much that you degrade yourself, copying another woman's traces, making yourself small in the dust? And now you come to me, begging me to give him a chance? On what grounds? In what role do you come to me? Steven's girlfriend? In your hearts, do you think you're especially noble, devoted, self-sacrificing? But where is your love in all this? In my understanding, love is equality, respect, reliance, loyalty, responsibility. It's a decision made after careful thought, but you treat it like child's play, something that can be replaced, compromised, shared. Who exactly are you trying to move?" She stared at me blankly. I said, "My time is valuable, Miss Violet. Today I spent an hour listening to your nonsense only so that this can end once and for all. Steven and I are in the past. The obstacle between you two has never been me. Love yourself first, then love another. That's my last piece of advice to you." I turned away. That was the last time I ever saw Violet. Chapter 7. The last time I received a call from Steven was before my wedding. 3 views aligned. Gentle and refined. Walking hand in hand, it was the kind of marriage others envied as a match made in heaven. On the phone, Steven congratulated me. I replied gracefully, "Thank you." He was silent for a moment, then asked, "Beatrice, I've always wanted to know, back then, when you agreed to be with me, was it just a moment of being moved? Or, did you actually ever like me?" I sighed. I often found myself sighing because of him. I'm a person with clear goals. Steven, I never waste time on things without an ending, and I wouldn't agree to be with someone just because I was moved. I knew you so well, before we even started. I already knew we weren't on the same path, but at that time, I still wanted to see how far we could go together. Don't ask me again whether I liked you or not. To do what I knew couldn't be done, that was my greatest respect for you. How could I have never been moved? When he teased me about carrying water tanks without caring for the dirt. When he looked at me gently under the moonlight, when I was pulled out from the ruins and saw him standing there like a god sent down from the heavens. But he never learned fidelity, and I was far too clear-headed, so the road between us was destined to break halfway. We were like an extra credit problem whose premise I knew was flawed. Yet still I had tried to see if I could solve it to a correct answer. I gave it my best effort. That's why I could set it down with ease. His voice on the other end grew quieter and quieter. I missed my chance, didn't I? I said nothing. Then his voice picked up again, forcing a hint of laughter. Then one last thing, Beatrice. I wish you happiness. I wish you happiness in every year to come. I smiled, polite and distant, and replied, and you as well, Stephen. I wish you happiness in every year too.